July 15, 1940. The English Midlands. A German reconnaissance pilot banks his Messerschmitt Bf 110 northwestward, his aircraft cutting through the afternoon haze. Below him, near the industrial city of Coventry, something catches his eye. A sprawling military airfield, dispersed fighters, ammunition dumps, fuel storage, anti-aircraft positions. He adjusts his camera, descends to 300 feet, and begins his photographic run. The pilot feels the familiar tension of flying over enemy territory, but he has trained for this. His photographs will be crucial intelligence. He will not know that what he is photographing does not exist. What the German pilot documented that day was an elaborate fiction. The airfield below contained no real aircraft. The ammunition dumps were hollow shells. The fuel storage consisted of empty tanks painted to appear full. Every structure, every vehicle, every installation had been deliberately constructed to deceive. And this was not an isolated deception. Across the length and breadth of Britain, German reconnaissance pilots were photographing hundreds of similar fakes, each one meticulously designed to appear genuine. Each one a lie meant to shape German strategy. Over the coming weeks and months, German bombing squadrons would waste thousands of pounds of ordnance attacking these phantom positions. German generals would redeploy valuable fighter squadrons to protect against airfields that existed only in photographs. Intelligence officers in Berlin would misdirect entire operational plans based on false evidence. What made this deception so remarkable was not merely its scale, but its audacity. The British had not simply hidden their real military installations. They had created an entirely fictional military landscape, and they had convinced one of the world's finest military powers to treat it as real. This is the story of how deception became a weapon of war, and how a handful of brilliant engineers and military planners turned empty fields into the most important battleground of 1940. The problem facing Britain in the summer of 1940 was existential. Following the fall of France in June, Nazi Germany stood triumphant across the Channel, merely 22 miles distant at the nearest point. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, possessed overwhelming numerical superiority. Conservative estimates suggested German air strength at over 2,600 serviceable fighters and bombers. British fighter strength stood at roughly 550 operational machines. In any conventional air campaign, the mathematics were catastrophic. Germany could afford losses that would cripple Britain. Britain could not afford losses that Germany could easily replace. Moreover, German High Command understood perfectly well that control of British airspace was prerequisite to any invasion attempt. The Luftwaffe's task was brutally simple: destroy the RAF. If they succeeded, German invasion forces would land unopposed. If they failed, Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, would have to be abandoned. For Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding and his fighters, the situation seemed nearly hopeless. Britain's fighter production, though impressive, could not match German output. Pilot training, though thorough, could not replace the experienced pilots being lost daily. The RAF had perhaps 2 or 3 months before attrition would leave it incapable of defending British airspace. German planners calculated with reasonable confidence that the RAF would cease to be an effective fighting force by early September 1940. And yet Britain had one advantage that German strategists had not fully appreciated. Britain could lie. More precisely, Britain could make Germany see what Britain wanted Germany to see. If the RAF could convince German High Command that it possessed far greater strength than it actually did, if German resources could be wasted attacking phantom airfields whilst real airfields remained untouched, then those precious months of British resistance might extend into autumn, when weather would make invasion impossible. But such a deception would require unprecedented levels of craftiness and technical sophistication. The solution came from an unexpected quarter. Air Chief Marshal Dowding understood that he lacked the means to win a conventional air battle. Instead, he would fight an unconventional one. In June 1940, he authorized the expansion of a small deception unit under Group Captain John Bevan and a remarkably talented officer named Colonel Turner. But the most crucial work fell to an even more obscure figure, a brilliant engineer named Jasper Maskelyne, working within the Air Ministry's new experimental station at RAF Biggin Hill. Maskelyne, who had previously worked in theatrical design and illusion, understood something that conventional military engineers often missed. The enemy does not see your installations directly. The enemy sees photographs. The enemy receives intelligence reports. The enemy interprets visual evidence. If you could control what the camera saw, you could control what the enemy believed. Maskelyne's team began with a deceptively simple task. They would build fake airfields. But these were not crude constructions. They were engineering marvels. The first decoy airfield, constructed near RAF Biggin Hill itself, consisted of a full-scale replica of the actual airfield's layout, complete with painted grass runways marked in white, dummy aircraft constructed from scaffolding and canvas, and realistic fuel and ammunition storage facilities. The dummy aircraft were built to be indistinguishable from genuine Spitfires and Hurricanes when photographed from altitude. They incorporated realistic detail, actual wings from damaged aircraft, accurately scaled fuselages, correct wheel positions. From 300 feet, a German pilot would see no difference. From 200 feet, only the trained eye would spot the deception. But Maskelyne and his team realized that mere visual similarity was insufficient. German photo reconnaissance was becoming increasingly sophisticated. Raw materials had to be authentic where it mattered. The team scrounged old engines from crashed aircraft to place beneath dummy fighters, creating realistic heat signatures that could potentially fool thermal imaging. They constructed actual underground shelters beneath the dummy installations, creating authentic-looking evidence of anti-aircraft defenses. They positioned genuine military vehicles around the decoy sites, vehicles that had been carefully arranged to match patterns seen at real airfields. The ingenuity extended to the smallest details. Dummy airfields included authentic-looking blast pens, the revetted positions where real aircraft were parked, constructed from earth and timber. They scattered realistic aircraft debris across the grounds. They painted the concrete with the wear patterns that genuine airfield usage created. By late August 1940, the British had constructed roughly 24 major decoy airfields across the critical southeastern regions. Smaller satellite decoys, requiring less elaborate construction, numbered in the hundreds. The production was staggering. Maskelyne's workshops operated 24 hours daily. Timber suppliers across southern England were pressed into service. Canvas arrived in vast rolls. Paint was mixed continuously. The workforce, carpenters, painters, engineers, and soldiers, numbered in the thousands. Many had no idea what they were actually building. They simply followed specifications. Build this framework to these exact dimensions, paint it this shade of gray, position it at these coordinates. The strategy proved devastatingly effective. German photo reconnaissance flights, which averaged one every 30 minutes during daylight hours, dutifully photographed the decoy sites. German intelligence officers examining the photographs saw evidence of massive RAF strength concentrated at key locations. German bombing forces, receiving targeting assignments based on these photographs, attacked with devastating effect against empty fields. In August 1940 alone, German bombers dropped over 300 tons of ordnance on decoy sites. In September, the figure exceeded 500 tons. Consider the material significance of that waste. 500 tons of bombs represented months of German bomber production. That ordnance, had it struck actual RAF airfields, might have crippled British air defenses entirely. Instead, it cratered empty fields and destroyed dummy aircraft. The psychological impact extended beyond mere material loss. German bombing commanders found themselves reporting remarkable resilience from the British. They would bomb what intelligence indicated was a major RAF airfield, only to observe new aircraft appearing there within days. German planners would task their bombers against a reported concentration of British fighters, only to receive reports from reconnaissance that the concentration had shifted elsewhere. The apparent British ability to recover instantly from bombing, to disperse forces so quickly, to reconstitute strength so rapidly, was entirely illusory. It reflected nothing but the placement of decoys. Yet, to German High Command, analyzing the evidence of photographs and bombing damage reports, it seemed that the RAF possessed almost magical resilience. Hitler himself received reports suggesting that the RAF was far stronger than it actually was. Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring, examining the photographs and hearing accounts of bombing effects, became increasingly convinced that he was facing an opponent of far greater strength than his intelligence estimates had suggested. If you are finding this fascinating, a quick subscribe helps more than you know and allows us to continue exploring these extraordinary stories from our past. The comparative analysis is instructive. Germany possessed nothing equivalent to the British deception operation. German military planning operated under the assumption that reconnaissance photographs provided reliable intelligence. The very concept of elaborate systematic deception seemed to contradict German military principles, which emphasized precision and direct confrontation. When German commanders eventually became aware that they were being deceived, a realization that came only late in the air battle, when damage assessment became impossible to dismiss, they were astonished. The German Air Force lacked any comparable deception capability. Their decoy operations, where they existed at all, were crude affairs. The British innovation was unique. By contrast, American deception operations, when the Americans eventually entered the war, would follow the British model closely. The Americans, however, lacked Britain's desperate urgency. Britain in 1940 deceived because deception meant survival. The Americans, by the time they developed comparable programs, were already assured of eventual victory through attrition. The British operation thus represents a historical anomaly, a deception so comprehensive and so crucial to national survival that it became perhaps the most significant intelligence operation of the war's opening phase. The impact on the course of the Second World War cannot be overstated. The Battle of Britain occurred during August and September 1940. German Air Force planners, believing themselves to be facing an RAF of greater strength than it possessed, made strategic decisions based on this false assessment. They dispersed their bombing effort across more targets than was optimal. They delayed concentrated assaults that might have destroyed RAF command and control. They diverted significant fighter forces to protect against threats from decoy airfields. Meanwhile, the actual RAF, operating from its real airfields with substantially intact command and control infrastructure, was able to maintain fighter strength sufficiently to inflict unacceptable losses on German bombers. By late September, Hitler recognized that the invasion of Britain could not proceed. The Luftwaffe had failed to establish air superiority. Whether this failure occurred because the RAF was genuinely stronger than German intelligence estimates suggested, or because German intelligence itself had been systematically deceived, became a matter of subsequent historical debate. The evidence, examined decades later, pointed clearly toward the latter conclusion. The British deception operation had worked so comprehensively that it had shaped the strategic decisions of the German High Command. In protecting against phantom threats, Germany had failed to destroy real British air power. That failure made invasion impossible. That impossibility meant Hitler could not concentrate his forces westward indefinitely, which meant he eventually turned east toward the Soviet Union. One could argue, with reasonable historical support, that a deception operation conducted across empty English fields in the summer of 1940 made possible Soviet survival and, ultimately, German defeat. The dummy aircraft cost far less than real fighters. The empty airfields cost nothing to maintain. Yet their strategic value exceeded that of entire squadrons. Returning to that July afternoon in 1940, when the German reconnaissance pilot photographed the decoy near Coventry, one appreciates the full scope of the deception. That single photograph, filed among thousands of others, became evidence in a vast intelligence edifice. That image, interpreted by German analysts, contributed to estimates of British strength. Those estimates shaped bombing priorities. Those priorities determined where German ordnance fell, and where that ordnance fell on empty fields determined whether real RAF aircraft could survive to fight another day. The entire chain of causation stemmed from a single false image, a fabrication so carefully constructed that it deceived not merely German soldiers, but German military science, German planning systems, and ultimately German strategic vision. What was achieved across those empty fields was the successful manipulation of enemy perception on a massive scale. A nation facing annihilation had weaponized deception. It had taken the fundamental instruments of modern warfare, photographs, intelligence reports, bombing coordinates, and turned them against their user. Where the German Air Force expected to find British strength, they found only canvas and timber. Where they concentrated their destructive effort, they achieved nothing. Where they hesitated, uncertain before what they believed to be formidable resistance, real RAF squadrons found the time and space to persist. The irony was exquisite. The German Air Force, possessing overwhelming material superiority, was defeated partly by an enemy that existed only in photographs. Those decoy airfields still exist in fragments across the English landscape. Near Biggin Hill, near Hornchurch, near countless other stations where real battles occurred, the remnants of fake installations can still be traced. Filled-in blast pens, leveled airfields, earth foundations, they tell a story of resourcefulness and desperate ingenuity. They commemorate not merely a military victory, but a victory achieved through the manipulation of perception itself. In an age of drone reconnaissance, satellite imagery, and data analytics, we have become accustomed to regarding photographs as truth. But the summer of 1940 taught a different lesson. Photographs can lie. Intelligence can be deceived. And sometimes the most powerful weapon in warfare is not a gun or a bomb, but the ability to make an enemy see what you want them to see.